Hello and welcome to our April Dev Talk on Enterprise Mobility Management. My name is Dan Qualiana. I'm the head of developer relations here at Zebra Technologies and really glad to have you joining us. This month we are talking about EMM, device admin, device owner, and this was a topic that we actually had a number of requests from or about. So if you do have topics you want us to talk about in future Dev Talks, please make sure you submit those to us, as we definitely are reading through those requests and trying to provide the information you're looking for. A few other notes for everyone. We will be taking the slides that they are presenting and posting those on the Zebra developer portal at developer.zebra.com. If you go to the events page, you'll see a post around this talk as well as previous talks we've had. We also are recording the session and we'll be posting this on the Zebra YouTube channel and also embedding that video back into that the post on the developer portal. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our hosts today. We have Dave DeGrassi, who is a product manager, and George Delarazza, an engineer. And as they're going through all of this, if you do have any questions, please make sure you write those down in the questions window, and we will be reviewing those as we get to certain stopping points throughout the presentation. So Dave and George, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Dan. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks to everyone for joining. My name is Dave DeGrassi, and I am the product manager for the administrator portfolio. Today, we're going to talk to you about EMMs, device administrator, device owner, and device management in general, and where we are and where we're going. So I'm going to move ahead to our agenda and cover the topics that will be presenting to you today. So to start off, we thought it was very important for us to communicate the evolution of device management. You know, where we came from, our journey to where we are today. The evolution of Android for work during that time, and how device management is performed on Android N. Then we will move on to device owner and managed configurations that will tie in with the previous topic of device management on Android N, and then eventually we'll end off with the bypass GMS setup wizard and enrolling in an EMM with Stage Now. So moving on to the evolution of mobile device management, manageability. I have George Delarazza, who will present the first part of the topic.
Thanks, Dave. So this entire presentation is it's kind of a high level, and as Dan said earlier, if any of these topics that we touch on deserve a little bit more in depth, I'd recommend suggesting them as topics for further sessions. But let's start off talking about what is device mobility management? How did we get where we are? And think way back to our Windows CE days. CE was open. Any application could manage a device. Mobile security at the time wasn't much of a consideration. This is before the explosion of consumer phones. So it was great for manageability, but there are quite a few security issues that we ended up dealing with over time. Android specifically was closed in order to be secure. The whole point of a personal phone, my device, I want to protect it from other people. And we don't really think about it as a device that needs to be managed. Dave, if you would. So when we're talking about consumer devices, we talk about the device owner is the person who owns the device. And clearly, once you've unlocked your device, you can do whatever you need to with it. Go into the settings app, make changes, customize it the way you see fit. Download applications to satisfy whatever needs you have. But when thinking about touching individual devices to configure for individual uses, that whole model falls apart when we talk about the enterprise and business line of applications. So the question comes up, it was posed to Zebra a long time ago, how can we configure our devices, or how can we set up our devices so that they can be managed by the enterprise? Because if you think about it, the whole definition of the device user now changes. We don't have the device owner, my personal device, that I'm the device owner and I can make changes with. We now have an enterprise who owns the device. Dave, if you continue on. So we recognize that there's a gap here. Android, great personal device. What gaps are there that we need to fill in order to make a device manageable by an enterprise? And MX was created to help fill the manageability gap. It provided the exposure of certain privileged functions to some management agent or MDM or EMM agent. So that application can now become a way, a conduit, a mechanism for an IT administrator in the enterprise to manage individual devices or groups of devices. It was proprietary, slow for adoption, Zebra devices. So when we talk about management agent, especially those available, third-party management agents, we want to be able to run them on any devices. But at least it was better than nothing. We had no other way of being able to manage these devices. Dave? Okay. Eventually, Google started to recognize that there was a bit of an adoption of Android into the enterprise space. And with Froyo, Google provided the Device Policy Manager class, which exposed a limited set of methods or functions that a device administrator application could use to expose manageability. Over time, these API grew, more and more of them, and ultimately when we got to Lollipop, Google started to call all of these APIs plus a few other functions as Android for Work. We now call this Android Enterprise. And Android for Work was really the term, Android for or Android Enterprise is really a term we use as an umbrella to encompass a few different functions that can be performed by an application that has special privileges on our devices or on Android devices. We're going to get into this a little bit more in the next section. Dave, if you would. This might be a good opportunity to break to see if there are any questions. Dan?
No questions quite yet, George. So just a reminder to people, though, when you do have those questions, just enter them into our into the question window.
Okay, Dave, let's move on. Okay, if you approach Google today and you start referring to Android for Work, they'll look at you as if they don't understand what you're talking about. They don't use this term anymore. Personally, it's a convenient term. It describes a certain set of functionalities that is available to an application to manage the devices. And perhaps during this presentation, you'll hear me refer to Android for Work. I try to use the words Android Enterprise, but sometimes I fall back. Dave, if you could continue. All right, so the question is, what was Android for Work? And as I said, it was an umbrella term that we used that defined a collection of API or functions that an application can use to help manage devices. It included Device Policy Manager class. I referred to it before as being introduced, that is, back in the Froyo days. and expanded over time. So there are some legacy device policies. For example, things like setting password expiration, right? Minimum length, complex password, things along those lines. We also have what we call device owner features. That is corporately owned single-use devices or COSU devices that help expand what the legacy device policies could do. It also includes what's called a package installer. And we talked about as a device owner, I want to be able to install applications on devices, upgrade them, remove them, no longer needed. Package manager, the package installer class allows those operations to be done silently by the management system. And of course, you have some Google Play APIs that allow a management system to contact Google Play services, to download applications from the Play Store, etc. Dave? Okay, I've referred once or twice to device administrators. So way back in 2.2, we talked about those device policy manager API. Device administrators could perform certain what they call security aware, could be a security aware applications. And here's some examples of things those APIs could do, and I've mentioned already. Password length, complexity, things along those lines. Along with those types of settings, the device administrator API could do things like disabling the camera, wiping the device, locking it, and do some other things. But the feature set exposed to a device administrator was limited. And device administrators are still available on Android devices up through and including O. Google has announced that they will be deprecating device administrator functionality in later versions of Android. Not quite sure which ones it'll be yet, but they will be. Dave? And by deprecating device administrator, that hole for management is filled by something Google calls the device owner. I guess you could call this almost a device administrator on steroids. It has full management control over the entire device. The device owner is an application run on the device that an IT administrator can use for management. There can only be one of them. Once a device owner is enrolled on a device, that application becomes the only and the single point of management for the device. Now, there is a special enrollment process. Now, I could go through the setup wizard, and through the setup wizard, I could decide I want a certain application to become the device owner of my personal device. And there's the hashtag AFW process that Google defines to allow a device owner to be enrolled. We also have ways that we can do it on Zebra devices through our staging process. And Dave will talk about that more later. Once a device owner is enrolled, he's enrolled forever unless one of two things happen. The device itself is factory reset, and you go back to what you had out of the box, or the device owner itself relinquishes that state and becomes demoted back to a device administrator. Things a device owner app can do equivalent to what we talked about with a device administrator, right? It can silently install applications, change the password settings, etc., wipe data, do all the things a device administrator can do, plus many more. Key ones that we would talk about would be certificate management. If you're using a Wi-Fi network that requires mutual authentication, the installation and management of certificates can be done through a device owner. Device owner also has a much more exposure to individual device settings than a device administrator. Dave, you can go on. Okay, our next section is going to be about Android Nougat. This might be a good place to stop to see if there are any questions.
Still no questions, George.
All right.
Doing a good job reviewing it all.
Thank you. Okay, now we come to Android N and mobile device management. We got to N. We have AFWs, no longer the name. We now have the device administrators. We have an Android enterprise, and Google now has a set of functionality exposed to the device owner that really goes beyond, or goes to the point where it satisfies, that's probably a better term, satisfies the needs of an administrator managing devices in the enterprise. It can now perform commonly required but not privileged functions, so we don't need to do any special things as an OEM to allow a third-party device owner to do what it needs to do. And as long as no factory reset is done on the device owner will always retain control. Keep in mind, important point is there can only be one device owner active on a device at a time. And the only way to get rid of it is to factory reset, or it needs to relinquish device owner capabilities. Dave? Okay, what about some proprietary functions? So Android Enterprise Features also has a way of exposing proprietary functions in a standards-based way. If you remember earlier on, I referred to MX, talk about it was Zebra proprietary, and it was slow for adoption. Well, now Google has provided a way to expose these proprietary functions in a standard way. These things are called managed configurations. The term application restrictions is also used here. So if you find that I switch back and forth between the two terms, mean the same thing. They are synonymous. Applications themselves publish a set of managed configurations, which are configurable items to configure the application itself. So we could take an example. Chrome on a device exposes some managed configurations. Some of the things you can configure that way through that standard interface could be set the home page. Other things related to entering passwords, form fill, I think it's called. These things can be done through a managed configurations. The device owner or MDM agent on the device reaches out to these applications to discover what's available for that particular application to configure. It can also be done on the server side. It can also be done through Play Store API up through the network. Dave, go on. So now, EMM or MDM vendors can using a standard-based way through Google-provided mechanisms can have one agent that manages any devices, whether it be Zebra, etc., through all that standard interface. It allows us to innovate. We can come up with our own value adds, and we can expose the configuration of those value adds through the interfaces that Google has provided. And then it's up to the enterprise to choose which EMM they decide satisfies their needs the best. Dave? Okay, any questions at this point?
Yes, now we have some questions coming in. So the first one is around device owner and whether it requires a GMS, Google Mobile Services version of Android.
That depends upon the EMM that was selected. The Android doesn't preclude a device owner in either GMS or not, but there are certain EMM vendors that do not support AOSP.
And then kind of a follow-up along those lines. So this is a partner that uses both some legacy AOSP devices like the WT6000 as well as a VC80 GMS. So if they want to have a customer with both of those, what is the best way to manage those two devices, or something similar where they're in the same environment?
Again, it depends upon the EMM that was chosen. If the EMM supports device owner mode in AOSP and GMS, I would recommend device owner mode, especially since we've already heard from Google that they're deprecating device administrator.
Okay. So it really is dependent on that EMM vendor. Okay.
Yeah, Google doesn't preclude device owner in AOSP. So it's all about, does the EMM offer it?
And do you know offhand if some of the major partners that Zebra works with allow device owner on some of the AOSP devices, such as like a modern one like the WT6000 we've come out with?
Oh, wow.
I know that that's
Dave,
a third-party question.
Yeah, Dave, do you know whether AirWatch, SODI, or any of the others support device owner mode in both GMS and non-GMS?
I believe
AirWatch does.
I believe AirWatch does, and I think SODI does as well.
No, AirWatch does not support device owner on AOSP.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah,
Thank you.
SODI does support on AOSP. They both support device owner on GMS, but AirWatch was following Google very closely, and Google obviously was pushing DO on GMS, and so they did not prioritize supporting AOSP. So right now, any customer, if they have AirWatch, any AOSP devices, they need to stay on device admin. And those are the only two I know about. I don't know about the other, EMMs that our customers have.
And Alison, for SODI, do they? It's a single agent for both DA and DO. Is that right?
No.
No, separate. Two separate
Yeah.
agents.
So SODI, you have to be much more careful. With SODI, they have a signed agent that works on our 8956 devices that supports both DA and that's how you get DA. Yeah, 8956, and you can do DA or DO. But if you want DA, when it gets to, I have to go back, and there's a matrix. I might need to come back to you on that in order to say it correctly. But they also then have their Android Enterprise agent, which is for DO on our Hawkeye device, on non-8956 devices, Nougat and going forward, where we changed the signing key. Then you have to use their Android Enterprise DO agent. But I have to think about how that means they did the AOSP. I have to go back but I think it's that same non-signed agent for AOSP supported on DO.
Allison, thanks for that. Do you mind just briefly introducing yourself so the listeners know who you are?
Yeah, sorry, kind of jumped right in. I'm Allison Clark. I work with Dave and George. I'm the program manager who supports our strategic relationship with SODI and AirWatch. So I get heavily involved in the EMM stuff.
Thank you. And you mentioned a matrix. Is there documentation online that our listeners can reference so they can try to look some of that up?
Yeah, I think, this is part of, I think, Dave, this was one of those things we were compiling as we were getting that information, and I think you were pulling something together, but I'm not quite sure where it was at.
Yeah, not for this, just because it's changing. It was in flux, so we always recommended to go to your EMM vendor and get the latest information from them.
Okay. And I do know, as we were prepping for this call, a lot of this information is, relatively new. And so there is a lot of change in this space, and that's part of why we wanted to have more of a basics call here first, so we could outline kind of the landscape. And then as more progress is made and we keep coordinating with our partners, that gives us the opportunity to have future webinars to go into more detail.
Yeah, and just real quick, I found what I was looking for, my reference. So if you have what we refer to as the Hawkeye device, the TC20 or TC25, for both GMS and AOSP on Nougat, you need to use for SOTI, this is all specific to SOTI, you would need to use their Android Enterprise agent. That is different than what they traditionally, we are familiar with, which was known Android Plus. So it's the Android Enterprise agent. That's what SOTI uses. It supports both GMS and AOSP in device owner mode. And for the TC20, TC25, that's the only mode you can have. They do not support the DA mode on the Hawkeye device. And it's also important to know, because SOTI used to bundle the remote control in and into the Android Plus agent. So starting with Hawkeye, again, for our devices where we change the signing key, it is a separate plugin. The remote control is a separate plugin. So you have your Android Enterprise agent and you have your remote control plugin. For your 8956 platform devices, if you want device owner, you would download the AEDO, the Android Enterprise Device Owner for SOTI one, and use the separate remote control plugin. But if you want your DA mode, then you would use their Android Plus agent, which is the signed agent and has remote control integrated into it.
Okay, great. We do have one other question. Do we know, actually, so Alison, you keep referencing 8956. Can you help us understand which specific devices?
Sorry. Yeah, that's so that's the chipset that is in our TC50, TC5X, starting with Nougat, and so TC50. I don't know, George, help me out. I know the
51 and 56.
51 and 56, and then the TC75, TC70 something, TC7X series, are VC80, starting with Nougat, and Sentry. And I forget what the device number is for Sentry. I just know the Sentry name.
What about the MC33 or the TC8000 and WT6000 devices?
TC8000 is not, it's Android 4.4 right now. So I don't, until we go to Nougat, there won't be a DO agent for it.
Yeah, and let me see if I can find, because I know some are getting upgraded to Nougat, and I think when they upgrade, they may be moving to the 8956 chipset, but I'm not positive. I think, but let me see if I can find something on that as well.
Okay. So it's right now the recommendation is to work with our vendors, AirWatch and SOTI, to see with their specific device support. But at the same time, I think that we are hearing, just through some of these questions from a number of people that they do see value if Zebra can help identify based on our product lines, where some of that support is. So it's sometimes a challenge working across companies and making sure we keep that up to date, but see some value in that.
I mean, keep in mind, now that we're talking about a standards-based interface, it's not so much the more popular EMMs to consider, but the tier 2 EMMs as well.
That's a really good point, George, because these are published APIs that are open to everyone. And we do see a broader group of partners who are picking up some of these APIs and just giving visibility to some of that rather than those are that are having a more robust infrastructure, and everything kind of in between on that spectrum as well.
Right. Right. And so you may have an EMM that has picked up, and if they support Android Enterprise, then at a baseline they would be able to support our devices just like a Samsung. Correct me if I'm wrong, George, but it'd be kind of like a consumer device. And then whether or not they support our value adds, the added MX that is not, that goes above and beyond what Android Enterprise gives, then that will be dependent upon whether or not that EMM has integrated with our EMM toolkit to be able to access those value adds. Is that a fair statement, George?
Well, there's two pieces I think you mentioned in there. First of all, the standards-based interface, which allows one EMM agent to work across any OEM, Zebra, Samsung, ... And then it can use managed configurations. I mean, this is the goal. Managed configurations on any of those devices to configure any of the value adds. Now, you're right, and we're going to get to this in a couple of slides from now about how do we transition from the proprietary interface we have today to the standards-based interface that we're heading towards. And we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. Was there any other questions, Dan?
No, those were the questions for now.
Great. David, could move on then?
Yep.
Okay, this slide is really intended to show how managed configurations as a way to configure devices has taken hold. Starfall, which was Google's EMM, essentially to help kind of kick things off. It has since been discontinued. They don't have it anymore. Help them to understand what it means to manage devices. Sony AirWatch have picked up managed configurations. They're supporting it, and it now spans a much broader community. And you can see that snapshot of the app config site showing a few of the EMM vendors that are taking on and understand the benefits of doing managed configurations. Google's made it mandatory, essentially, is what it comes down to. Now that we've got the endorsement from the community, it's now something that's mandatory. Zebra's taken the concept the next step. Remember, we talked about managed configurations, and Dave, you can move to the next slide. As we talk about managed configurations or application restrictions, we looked at that and said, well, this is great as a mechanism to configure an application. And we talked about Chrome as an example before. We said this would be a wonderful way for us to provide a way to configure the device itself, not just the applications. So the direction we're headed, or where we're headed, is to use this standard-based interface for managed configurations to allow us to expose configurable items on the device. Things like backlight timeout, things like, I don't know, search through the settings app and pick one at random. And we may have a way of configuring that setting through a managed configuration. This is a sort of a way that any OEM could expose their value adds in a standards-based way. Dave, can you move on? Okay. A minute or two ago, we talked about how we're getting from that proprietary MX interface we have today up through device owner with managed configurations. We want to do that, and we want that transition to occur through Android N. We know that in future releases of Android, Google has said we're no longer supporting device administrators. So we needed to find a way to make it easier for EMMs to support AFW. Again, I'll use that term because it's convenient. Make it easier for them to support our devices. We had to be careful with backwards compatibility. Things like EMDK, EMM Toolkit. We want to also expose our value adds using these standard-based methods and kind of get rid of anything that's proprietary. I want to make sure this covers our entire portfolio. So what we're doing for EMMs has the same look and feel, no matter what device you're holding. Dave, you can go on one more. Okay, so how are we getting there? Here's what we have currently. We have the EMM tool, an EMM or stage now as an application sitting on our MX framework, really, which is the EMM toolkit. The toolkit does its work through what we call configuration service providers, or CSPs. They will call into what are Zebra extensions, and this is where all the proprietary stuff is. And then finally down into the Android framework. This is what we have today to support our device administrators configuring Zebra value adds and some things that Google just hadn't gotten around to expose yet. Dave? Where we want to get to with AFW is to have the EMM or stage now sitting up on the top and be able to call the Android APIs directly or work through managed configurations to get to anything that's private Android or Zebra proprietary. That interface, the Android AFW API in the managed configs, that's the standards we talked about before. Then the question becomes, okay, how do we get from current to what we want to do in Android N and beyond? Dave? Okay. This part probably looks pretty complicated, but in the end, what it's trying to show us is we're exposing both mechanisms at the same time. So for Android N, a device administrator agent using the current framework to configure Zebra value adds or some Android things, it's all supported. And at the same time, we've exposed that standards-based interface to allow the EMMs a way to transition from their device administrator to device owner. Customers can transition when they get to Android N from a device administrator to a device owner. And over the course of the release of Android N and into early O, we'll finish up the transition and move away from our legacy or current support. Dave? Okay. This might be an opportunity to stop to see if there are any questions. That last slide could get a little complex.
No questions came in on that one yet.
Okay. That topic might end up being its own session by itself. Let's see if there are questions at the end about it.
Okay.
All right, Dave, can I hand off to you?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to be discussing enrolling EMMs with Stage Now. But before we dive into that, I want to point out in Marshmallow, we used to have multiple staging applications or clients built into our BSPs, and you may have noticed that in Android N, they are no longer present. That's because we're moving towards a more streamlined experience where Stage Now is the only staging tool that will be required for our devices. So to enroll an EMM, there's a couple of device-side dependencies. First of all, it should be factory reset with no third-party apps or user data on the device. And the devices should be an Android Nougat or greater with MX version 7.1 or greater on the device. And you will need to download the latest installation or executable to install Stage Now, which is currently 2.10.1, and it's available on the support portal. You will need to set up your EMM console for DO enrollment. Yeah. So setting up the staging or the necessary profile on your console for your DO devices. You will need to obtain the EMM installable APKs required to be installed on the devices. That would be the agent and any other files that they may provide. You'll need to make sure that you have the device enrollment credentials required to enroll your devices into the console, the device management console, and you'll need to contact your EMM vendor to provide you the JSON string contained within their QR code used for device enrollment. That's the Google native method of enrolling DO agents into the EMM. I think that's where, George, correct me if I'm wrong, that's where you need to tap on the welcome screen 7 times to bring up the ability to scan the QR code. And so it would be the contents of that QR code you would need is in the form of a JSON string, and you would need to obtain the formatting of that content or that string from your EMM vendor, because it's EMM's vendor specific.
That's right, Dave. The Google provides a way that through standard Android, a device owner can be enrolled. When enrolling that device owner, there are certain device owner, or maybe I should say EMM specific attributes that need to be passed off to the device owner. And those things are entered in what's called the JSON format built into the QR code. Clearly, for our enrollment purposes, we also need to provide that JSON information to the device owner as well.
Thank you, George. And lastly, you'll have to contact Zebra support to request an Enroll DO certificate and obtain necessary files to create a DO enrollment profile within StageNow. The list of the files that you'll need for creating the enrollment profile in StageNow, there's a device owner enrollment.zip file, which is a StageNow profile. There's a peer.dos.zip file that's a StageNow profile for persistence. Then there's the certificate for the agent. Then there's the provisioning APK application that we will be providing. And then there's the provisioning.json file, which is the JSON string that you'll be providing, that you'll be obtaining from the EMM vendor. A little bit about the device owner enrollment .zip file. That is a predefined enrollment or StageNow profile that that will it's like a wizard, but it's a profile that we predefined that will walk you through the process of enrolling the DO. The StageNow profile for persistence is a profile that you will export as an XML and embed in the device owner enrollment zip file at the batch CSP step of that profile.
So Dave, if I could just jump in for a second.
Sure.
These are all important steps in the released images or released products we have today. We expect that over time, at least through Android O, we'll be making some improvements to the process to make it even easier. There are some things in there like the provision APK. Perhaps that's something that we can include in the way the device owner is enrolled to essentially reduce some of the steps. That Enroll DO certificate, we know will always be needed when upgrading from a device administrator to device owner. But there are also areas for improvement with that certificate when talking about initial staging. And perhaps, Dan, these are some good topics for presentation at another session.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And also what we've created, those profiles that we've created. Let me just scroll back a little bit here. So these profiles are a baseline of all the things that need to happen, and the EMM will need to help in defining anything that's specific for their particular their particular installation or their particular flow of the profile. We know that some EMMs will require a condition manager for some timing that you can embed in, but we've laid out the basic flow in these profiles. Okay, so for the first step, you want to create a folder on your workstation that will contain all the files that you need, and there will be we're recommending the EMM/install folder, and then you will copy the files that you've acquired from your EMM and put them all in. Sorry, not the EMM that you acquired from us, and as well as the EMM agents into that folder. Everything that's going to be installed and also persisted should go into this folder. And then you're going to copy the APK that we've provided you and paste that into the install folder, as well as the JSON file in step 4. So all these files that I mentioned earlier, that I listed earlier, will be contained within the install folder along with your EMM agent. In stage now, you'll import the peer DO profile into the tool, and then as you navigate through the profile, you can make your specific edits where you would specify what are the APKs that are going to be installed after a enterprise reset. So that way, when you perform an enterprise reset, all these files that are in the peer, or all the instructions that are in the peer do.xml will be executed, and your device will become managed after an enterprise reset. And this is step 9, is where you do the exporting, and that's one of the files that you'll put into the EMM install folder over here in step 10. It is case sensitive, so make sure that when you type out the file names and the folders, that you're using the right cases. So in step 11, you'll have to import the second of the 2 stage now profiles, and that would be the device owner enrollment.zip file into the workstation, and in the same method that you imported the peer DO profile. You'll edit the profile for your site-specific information. In step 13 here, you'll have to enter your Wi-Fi profile information that's unique to the customer, or your staging environment. And in step 14, you'll select File Manager and choose your enrollment DO certificate that you'll install onto the device that you've acquired from us. And then on step 4, you'll be navigating to the EMM folder that you've created on your workstation to, how are we doing this step? This is just to point to the other files that are in the profile. And then at the very end of the procedure, you will publish the barcode, or sorry, publish the profile and create a barcode. And before scanning the barcode to begin staging, you will need to ensure that the Stage Now workstation is connected to the local staging network, and ensure that Stage Now is running on the workstation, unless you were using the external staging server option that's available in 2.10. And before the initial enrollment, you'll need to have the devices, like I said, under factory reset, so there's no it's right and out of an out of box state, and you'll be able to scan the barcode in step 9 here to bypass the setup wizard, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on what that experience is like. And when you do scan this barcode in step 19, you will bypass the setup wizard, and Stage Now will be automatically launched. And at which point you will be able to begin your staging process. And so a little bit more about booting into Stage Now from a GMS device. In the past, you would in Marshmallow GMS devices, you'll be presented with a welcome screen, and then you'll need to manually skip through or add your options here, or select your options here. And after many screens later, you can eventually get to the home screen. And that is the setup wizard over here that you want to be able to bypass. So what we've done is we've created that barcode that I showed you in the profile, where you'll scan a barcode and you'll go from the welcome screen directly into Stage Now, where you can begin your staging process. So when you scan the barcode, OSX will read that setup, that bypass setup wizard barcode, and launch Stage Now. And MX will then be ready to set the flag for bypassing the setup wizards for future enterprise resets. So when you do perform an enterprise reset and your EMM agent is reinstalled, you don't have to go through the setup wizard screens again, or scan the setup wizard bypass barcode again. So maybe now is a good time to take questions on that profile.
So we had a couple questions on that. So one of them was really just understanding why we're going down the path of forcing people to use Stage Now versus giving them the option to use another EMM vendor.
So we are enabling our EMM vendors first of all, we want to streamline the process to use the Stage Now staging tool, because staging is something that as an OEM we feel that we own. We can make that experience very seamless and efficient. So what we've done is we've enabled our EMM vendors to or we are enabling our EMM vendors partners to generate Stage Now barcodes. And so that's not available today, but the APIs are up and on the cloud, and EMMs are moving towards integrating that solution. So within the EMM solution, it'll be a one-tool solution. You'll go to the console of your respective EMMs, and you'll be able to generate Stage Now barcodes from there. And you won't need to use the Stage Now workstation tool for enrolling into an EMM.
So I just want to add a little bit to that, Dave. I want to be clear. Stage Now does not take the place of an EMM. It just is in the initial staging of the device and how an EMM agent may get down onto the device. It is not necessarily intended to replace all functionality of provisioning and managing that device.
Yeah, absolutely. This whole profile that we went through here is to be able to get the EMM agent on the device and into a managed state by your particular EMM, whether it's Mobile Iron or SOTI or AirWatch or Mass 360. It doesn't really matter. It's an EMM agnostic solution.
And so is the barcoding that we have at that beginning to bypass the setup wizard for Android, is that something that's unique to Zebra, or is that also part of like a standard Android feature?
That is unique to Zebra today, and it is available online on our support portal and our TechDoc site as well.
Okay. One other question we had is if it will be possible to use an external server for Stage Now, such as we used to have in MX.
Yeah, so today in version 2.10, it is available to use an external staging server. There was a check in place where when you're creating a profile, you have to use version MX version 7.1 or later to be able to have that option exposed. But in the next release, which should be, I think, late April, early May, we'll be releasing Stage Now version 2.11. And 2.11, we've removed that dependency. So you'll be able to use an external staging server with any version of MX. You just have to be mindful of the transport protocol that you're using. FTP is only FTP is supported prior to MX version 7. That's a device side dependency. And then in MX version 7.0, we've introduced support for HTTP and HTTPS. And in MX version 7.1, we've introduced support for FTPS.
Okay, thank you. Those were all the questions that we had right now. Which seems like pretty good timing because we're just about at the top of the hour. I would say, Dave and George, this was a really helpful overview. I think, as you guys are going through this, we're seeing that there are a lot of changes that Android is pushing through, and then a lot of coordination between the Android team and Zebra and EMM vendors and others using the EMM APIs. So this was really helpful. And, as we talked about before, as things keep progressing, we'll have another session so that we can dive into more of the specifics and help people out with those as well.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everything else. Any last thoughts from the presenters?
Just a request. I'd be really interested, as we look at what additional detail we go into, it would be interesting to hear the feedback as to those areas that, where more of the questions come as people have a chance to think through this or what they're seeing out in the field, so we can prioritize, what we develop or, the sessions that we schedule appropriately.
Thanks. And so, folks, you can give feedback, through this presentation. We do have a few questions and things where you can offer that up. You can do it in the question window, or you can even go to the Zebra developer portal and give us some feedback on there. That's at developer.zebra.com. As a reminder, we will be posting these slides as well as a recording of the presentation on that developer portal under the events page. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I want to give a big thank you to Dave and George and also Allison for the presentation.